Hey guys, tonight we wander beneath a thick, velvet sky, where the moon hangs like a pearl in a streaked crown. You're not in your own backyard anymore. No LED porch lights. No passing Ubers, no buzzing street lamps. Just the hush of leaves stirring in a hedgerow, the faint rustle of skirts over gravel, and the clink of a trowel against a midnight pot. You are, quite impossibly, in a Victorian garden. But not just any garden, this one blooms in the dark. The air is heavy with lavender and damp earth. Somewhere nearby, a fox coughs. You're not alone. You never are in these gardens. You probably won't survive this if you're expecting a normal sleep schedule. Because the Victorians didn't just lose sleep, they reinvented the very idea of what night could be. So here you are, in a world where insomnia wasn't just suffered, it was cultivated like a rare orchid that only opens its petals under the stars. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. Let's see who else is wide awake with us tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge past a wrought iron gate, its hinges creaking like an old man waking from a nap he never meant to take. The gravel crunches beneath your boots. Handmade, obviously, no rubber soles here. A stray cat eyes you from the top of a crumbling brick wall, its yellow eyes reflecting the moonlight like twin lanterns. The garden is quiet but not dead, far from it. It's alive in a way that only the night permits. Petals pulse faintly in the dark. You swear you hear a rose sigh. In Victorian England, night gardening wasn't just a curiosity. It was a strange, poetic rebellion. Against sleep. Against their own bodies. Against a world that insisted on daylight for all things productive and proper. You see them now. Figures moving in the shadows. Not ghosts, not quite. Though let's be honest, some of them look like they haven't slept since the Crimean War. There's a woman in a high, necked gown, her hands buried in a bed of night, blooming serious. A flower that opens once a year, only after dusk. There's a man in a waistcoat loosening his cravat, as he waters a patch of heliotrope with the care of a surgeon. You pass a boy, no older than 12, trailing a lantern as he searches for slugs. His mother waits nearby with a tin of salt. You wonder, why? Why garden at night? In a world where candles cost money and the fog could kill you. Well, for one, the fog was already there. Industrial London and its sister cities belched smoke from 1,000 chimneys. The sun struggled to reach the streets most days. So at night, at least the smoke settled. The air was still heavy, sure, but also still. Almost clean. At least that's what you tell yourself. Historians still argue whether the rise in night gardening was a true cultural movement or just a poetic footnote. A symptom of something larger, darker, and soot-stained. But one thing's clear, insomnia was rampant. The Industrial Revolution didn't just wake up the economy, it woke up people. Literally. You feel it now, that buzz behind your eyes after a long day spent doing everything you were supposed to. The Victorians felt it too. Their lives were ruled by the tyranny of clocks. Trains ran on timetables, factories ran on shifts. Even the household had its own strict scheduled: breakfast at 8, tea at 4, bed by 10, if you could sleep. And many couldn't. You pass a small cast iron bench. There's a journal left open on it, its ink smudged by dew. You read a line: "I find more peace among the foxglove at midnight than ever I did at church." You smile. That tracks. Some called it lunatic gardening. A little unfair perhaps, but not entirely wrong. The moon was a major player here. Its pull wasn't just tidal, it was emotional, physical, even spiritual. The Victorians believed in moonlight as a kind of medicine. Dangerous medicine, maybe, but powerful. And if you were already awake, why not go out and bathe in it? A soft breeze carries the scent of jasmine. You follow the path deeper, noticing how the garden seems designed for night. Pale flowers, silvery foliage, white gravel paths that catch the faintest light. It's not accidental. These were moon gardens, carefully curated to be beautiful in darkness. You crouch beside a bush of angel's trumpet. It glows faintly as if lit from within. You resist the urge to touch it. Smart choice. It's poisonous. That's another thing. These gardens weren't just for show. They were risky. The Victorians loved risk in their botany. The more exotic, the better. Nightshade, datura, even wolfspan. Plants that whispered of danger and mystery. Perfect for those who couldn't sleep and didn't particularly want to be safe. Nearby, a gardener hums softly. He's pruning with surgical precision, his shears clicking like a metronome. You notice his hands shake slightly. Not from age, but from too many nights like this. Too much tea. Too much thinking. Not enough rest. You sit on a low stone wall and look up. The stars are faint. London never lets them shine, but the moon is full. There's a halo around it. A sign of rain, maybe. Or madness. Hard to tell. You wonder what brought you here, to this place of sleepless cultivation. Maybe you're just curious. Maybe you too have felt that restless pull at 2 a.m. The need to do something with your hands, to make beauty out of insomnia. The Victorians didn't have screens. No endless scroll of doom or dopamine. They had gardens, and secrets, and time. And so you stay, just a little longer, listening to the night breathe, watching the flowers bloom, not in spite of the dark, but because of it. You take a slow step forward, your boots sinking slightly into the damp soil. The garden path curves beside a hedge that's been trimmed into the vague shape of a gryphon. Or maybe it's just a very ambitious shrub. Either way, it's clear someone's been here recently. Clippings lie scattered at its base, still green and wet. You glance around, half expecting to see a gardener lurking in the shadows, shears in hand, eyes wide from too much tea and too little sleep. You're not wrong to imagine it. Because here, in this age of soot and smoke, sleep is no longer a guarantee. It's a luxury, a battle. And for many Victorians, it's one they're losing. You tilt your head skyward. The stars are mostly gone, swallowed by the haze. The moon is a pale coin behind gauze. You breathe in deeply and immediately regret it. The air tastes of coal smoke and damp wool, with the faintest note of something metallic. Welcome to the beating, wheezing heart of the British Empire. The air itself is industrial. The Victorians didn't expect to sleep well. The air quality alone made it hard. Picture this. In London by the 1850s, the city burned nearly 1 million tons of coal each year. 1 million. That's not just a lot. That's enough to coat every building, every leaf, every lung. It wasn't just fog that hung low over the city. It was pea soupers, thick yellowish smog so dense you could lose sight of your own hand. And while the day was bad, the night could be worse. The cold made people light more fires. The fog thickened. The air pressed in like a damp wool blanket soaked in tar. No wonder people couldn't sleep. You hear a cough nearby, dry, hacking, familiar. A woman leans against a tree, wrapped in a shawl. She's trying not to wake the baby on her chest. You can almost hear her thoughts. If I can just get a few minutes of quiet. Insomnia wasn't all poetry and posies. It was a class issue, too. The working poor lived in overcrowded tenements, often sharing beds in shifts. Night shifts at factories meant bodies were always moving, stomping around, coughing in the dark. Children cried. Pipes groaned. Rats scurried. And outside, the clatter of carts, the shouts of drunks, the constant hum of a city that never really slept. Because it never really could. Historians still argue whether the rise in sleep disorders was physiological or psychological. Whether it was the noise, the air, or the sheer stress of modern life that kept people twitching in their sheets. But the result was the same: a generation of wired, wary souls who had to find something, anything, to fill the long hours between midnight and dawn. And for some, that something was gardening. You pass a small patch of chamomile, its white flowers glowing faintly. Someone has placed a tiny bench beside it, just big enough for one. You sit. The silence is thick, but not empty. This is a cultivated quiet, a chosen one. The very act of gardening offered something industrial life lacked control. You couldn't stop the trains, or the factory whistle, or the price of bread. But you could coax a rose to bloom. You could train ivy to climb the exact way you wanted. You could bury your hands in soil and feel, for a moment, that you were shaping something instead of being shaped. Of course, not everyone had the space for this. But those who did, especially the middle and upper classes, transformed their insomnia into something oddly beautiful. Night gardening became both a coping mechanism and a flex. A status symbol draped in moonlight. You crouch beside a row of snapdragons, their faces drooping like sleepy sentinels. Somewhere behind you, a door creaks open. A soft glow spills onto the path, a warm, flickering yellow. Gaslight. You turn your head and glimpse a man stepping out in a dressing gown, his slippers nearly silent. He carries a lantern in one hand, a cigar in the other. He's not here to prune. He's here to pace. Insomnia affected men too. Particularly the overworked, the anxious, the chronically repressed. Think of the classic Victorian gentleman tightly wound, emotionally constipated, expected to be both ruthless and refined. Add a little indigestion, some lingering trauma from boarding school beatings, and the ever-present fear of financial ruin, and boom, you've got a recipe for 3 a.m. garden pacing. You rise and follow the man at a distance. He moves slowly, pausing now and then to tap ash into a hedge. He mutters to himself. Maybe he's reciting poetry. Maybe he's reliving an argument from dinner. Maybe he's just trying to remember what it feels like to be tired. He passes a sundial, ironically useless at this hour. But it's beautiful, silvered with age, topped with a small brass owl. You wonder if it's meant to mark the hours of the night instead, a quiet rebellion against the tyranny of daylight. The Victorian obsession with time was both a marvel and a curse. Railways required strict schedules. Pocket watches became fashionable and functional. Entire households revolved around chiming clocks. But if you couldn't sleep, that ticking became unbearable. The sound of failure, minute by minute. So people turned the night into their own. They invented rituals, tea at midnight, moonlit walks, reading by gaslight, and for the lucky or eccentric, gardening. Not just as hobby, but as therapy. As meditation before anyone had the word for it. You pause beside a bee skep, empty of course, at this hour. But still, its presence matters. Bees were a symbol of order, of productivity. The irony isn't lost on you. The sleepless tending to symbols of tireless work. But maybe that was the point. If you couldn't rest, at least you could be useful. You could grow something. A cat slinks past your ankles, startling you. It disappears into the lavender. You swear it gives you a judgmental look. Fair. You stretch your arms, the cool air tightening your skin. This garden isn't large, but it feels infinite in the dark. A maze of shadows and softly breathing plants. You could get lost here. On purpose. And maybe that's the appeal. In a world that was always watching, neighbors, servants, society. The night offered privacy. What you did at 2 a.m. That was yours. No one peered in. No one judged. You could wear what you liked, hum to yourself, even talk to the begonias if you wanted to. Who would know? You hear the rustle of a watering can being set down. Another gardener. You don't speak. You just nod. That's enough. Here in the stillness you begin to understand. This wasn't just about insomnia. It was about reclaiming something. In the face of choking smog, relentless clocks, and sleepless minds, the night garden became a kind of sanctuary. A place to breathe, even when the air was thick with coal dust. You follow a winding path now, its edges lit faintly by the silver sheen of moonlight reflecting off damp, flat stones. The hedges are taller here, a little more unruly. As though you've wandered out of the garden proper, and into some secret annex, where etiquette has been left behind with the parasols and the polished shoes. The scent changes. Too, less floral now, more earthy. A tang of root and resin, something herbal, something medicinal. You duck beneath a low-hanging branch, only to find yourself staring into a carved wooden sign, nailed to a tree, the epitherium. It sounds fictional, something from an alchemist's dream. But this was real in the Victorian night garden. A hidden corner for the sleepless to experiment with nature's, let's say, less regulated offerings. This is where the opium dreams begin. You step into a clearing lined with planters and stone troughs, each one crowded with plants that seem to hum with secret power. Poppies. Of course, those crimson queens of the garden, nodding their heavy heads like they're too tired to stay awake themselves. But also valerian skullcap, foxglove, and something that looks suspiciously like cannabis, though it's been cleverly tucked behind a hedge of rosemary. You crouch beside a ceramic jar, abandoned on a bench. The label is faded but legible elixir of restful vapors. You unscrew the lid and sniff. Big mistake. It smells like licorice, old socks, and regret. Laudanum, most likely. A Victorian favorite. Equal parts opium and alcohol, packaged in decorative bottles and sold over the counter like cough syrup. Back then, laudanum was everywhere. In pharmacies. In baby bottles. In your aunt's tonic. That made her stare at wallpaper for 4 hours. It was the go-to for everything from menstrual cramps to melancholia. And yes, insomnia. You weren't sleeping. Don't worry. Just take a few spoonfuls, lie back, and try not to hallucinate too hard. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of opiates in Victorian society was a symptom of widespread illness or just a convenient way of dulling the misery of modernity. It's hard to say. What's clear is that a whole generation floated through the night in a kind of dreamy torpor, half awake, half asleep, and entirely dependent on substances that numbed more than just their nerves. You find a leather-bound notebook nearby, open to a page covered in energetic, slightly unhinged handwriting, planted belladonna under the moon. She speaks to me now. The soil pulses. I feel unburdened. Okay. That's either a poem or someone who's had a bit too much of the herbal cordial. But not all remedies were narcotic. Many sought gentler cures. You pass a small bed of chamomile and lemon balm, their delicate leaves trembling in the breeze. These were the comfort herbs, steeped into teas, tucked into sachets, even worn as amulets. A lavender posy beneath the pillow, a valerian root in your pocket. There was a sense that sleep could be coaxed, not just chemically forced. You reach a wooden table cluttered with tincture bottles and drying racks. Someone's been busy. You imagine a Victorian lady in her dressing gown, sleeves rolled, carefully measuring out drops of tincture by candlelight. She's read Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management, cover to cover. She knows how to make a sleeping draught that won't kill you. Probably. Of course, not everyone shared the same access to these remedies. The poor had fewer options. Maybe a hot brick at the foot of the bed, a mug of ale, a prayer. But if you were wealthy, or just eccentric, you could afford to dabble in the botanical arts. You could turn your insomnia into a science project. You brush your hand along a tall stalk of datura, angel's trumpet. Beautiful. Deadly. The Victorians loved it. Not because it helped with sleep, but because it blurred the lines between waking and dreaming. It was said to induce visions. Some called it the devil's weed. Others called it Tuesday. You can hear a faint melody now. Someone humming, maybe, or just the wind through the trellises. It's hard to tell. That's the thing about this part of the garden. It doesn't want to be clear. It wants to be ambiguous, a place where you don't quite know if you're still awake or already dreaming. There's a particular kind of person who thrives in this ambiguity. The amateur herbalist, the nocturnal philosopher, the woman who reads the yellow wallpaper and nods a little too knowingly. These were the people who turned to plants not just for health, but for answers. The garden was their apothecary, their altar, their rebellion against the stiff prescriptions of Victorian medicine. You sit on a low stone bench and close your eyes for a moment. The air smells of crushed mint and damp moss. You can feel the pulse of the garden, slow and steady. It's not trying to wake you or put you to sleep. It just is, existing in its own rhythm, offering its leaves and roots and petals like an open hand. It's easy to forget, in this dreamy hush, that some of these night gardeners weren't just looking for rest. They were looking for escape. From their lives, their marriages, their expectations. Some sought oblivion. Others, clarity. A few just wanted to feel anything, even if it came in the form of a vision of a talking fox among the primroses. You rise again, swaying slightly. The path ahead glows faintly with crushed oyster shell, a trick some use to reflect the moonlight. You follow it, passing under a trellis heavy with climbing jasmine. You can almost taste the scent, sticky, sweet and a little intoxicating. And then you see it, a small greenhouse, its glass panes fogged with condensation. Inside, a faint golden glow. Someone's still awake, still experimenting, still hoping that somewhere in all these roots and leaves and tinctures, there's a cure for whatever keeps them up at night. You smile, because it's touching, really. The idea that nature holds a key, that with the right combination of petals and patience, you might unlock rest. You might outwit the ticking clock. You might finally sleep. Or you might just end up with a very expensive collection of poisonous plants and a reputation for being a little eccentric. Either way, it's better than lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. You take one last look at the epitherium. It's quiet again, the jars and vials tucked neatly like sleeping children. But you know it'll be busy tomorrow night, and the next, until someone finds a better cure, or at least a stronger tea. You emerge from the epitherium blinking, as if you've just left a dream, or maybe entered a different one. The air is cooler here, brushed with the scent of clipped grass, and something faintly metallic, like freshly turned soil and old garden tools left out in the dew. You've stepped into a more orderly part of the night garden. The beds are neatly arranged, the hedges crisp and symmetrical. No wild herbs peeking out of planters here. This is the curated realm, the display garden, and make no mistake, it's showing off. You stroll under an arch of ivy and wrought iron, and suddenly, you feel a shift in the atmosphere. Less mystery, more majesty. This is where the insomnia becomes elegant, where sleeplessness is dressed in silk robes and silver hairpins. Here, the garden isn't just a garden, it's a status symbol. You pause beside an elaborate fountain shaped like a Roman nymph pouring water from an urn. The water sparkles under the moonlight, catching on lily pads floating like idle thoughts. You imagine the lady of the house, perhaps Lady Penelope of somewhere, important, stepping out in her embroidered slippers, trailing a lace shawl and the scent of rose water. She isn't here to dig. She's here to observe, to glide, to own. Victorian society was obsessed with appearances, and nowhere was this more evident than in their gardens. By day, a well-kept garden was a sign of refinement, wealth, and good breeding. By night, it became something more intimate, more theatrical. The wealthy turned their insomnia into a performance. Moonlight strolls, midnight teas, whispered conversations beneath pergolas draped in wisteria. It was all part of the show. You trail your fingers along a row of white roses so pristine they look unreal. That's deliberate. White flowers were prized in night gardens. They caught the moonlight, shimmered in the dark, and whispered of purity, wealth, and careful curation. They didn't just bloom, they behaved. Historians still argue whether these displays were sincere expressions of personal taste or carefully cultivated illusions meant to impress neighbours and outshine rival households. Probably both. The Victorians were masters of duality, passion veiled in propriety, indulgence wrapped in duty, and gardens that were both sanctuary and stage. You spot a small sign beside a flower-bed moonlight border. The plants here are all pale, white foxglove, silver, leaved lamb's ear, moon daisies. They glow faintly, arranged in layers like a floral wedding cake. You imagine the gardener tasked with maintaining this bed, up at dawn, trimming each leaf to perfection. And then, at night, the family steps out to bask in the result, perhaps with guests in tow. Because yes, there were guests. Night gardening wasn't always a solitary pursuit. Among the upper class, it became a social activity. Small exclusive garden parties held after dark, candles in glass lanterns, champagne chilling in silver buckets, maybe a string quartet playing softly from under a linden tree. And of course, the garden itself, lit by moonlight and gas lamps, arranged to suggest effortless natural beauty, while actually being the result of meticulous human effort. You pass a marble bench embroidered with lichen, and you sit for a moment. You imagine being one of those guests. Maybe you're holding a glass of something bubbly. Maybe your host is showing you a new variety of white tulip imported from Holland, specially bred to bloom at night. You nod appreciatively, not because you care about tulips, but because that's what you do at these sorts of events. But not all visitors were so polite. There was gossip in the hedges, of course. Scandal behind the topiary. Affairs hinted at beneath the moonflowers. The nighttime garden offered a kind of plausible deniability. Who could say what was seen or not seen in the shadows? That duality again. The garden was beautiful, yes, but also a performance, a mask, and the insomnia behind it, often hidden. It wasn't fashionable to admit you couldn't sleep. That was weakness. Instead, the sleeplessness was reframed. Oh, I simply adore the garden at midnight. Translation: I paced here for 2 hours trying to silence my inner monologue. You rise and continue along a path of crushed seashells, which crunch softly underfoot. This was another trick of the wealthy, using pale materials for pathways that reflected light and glowed faintly in the dark. Practical, yes, but also another chance to show off. Crushed seashells weren't cheap. You pass a rose arbor, heavy with blooms. You inhale. The scent is heady, almost too sweet. Roses were another staple of the status garden. Not the rugged old English varieties, but the new hybrids, bigger, bolder, bred for colour and scent. Imported specimens, cultivated with care and, let's be honest, a bit of competitive spirit. Gardens were an extension of the home, and in Victorian England, the home was everything. A reflection of your morals, your values, your class. And if you couldn't sleep, well, at least your insomnia could be productive. You could supervise the gardeners. You could host a nocturnal salon. You could take a turn around the rose beds and pretend it was by choice. You glance up at the house looming behind the garden. The windows are dark, but you sense movement inside. A curtain twitches, a figure shifts, maybe someone watching, or maybe just a trick of the light. Either way, the house and the garden are inseparable. One shows the world who you are by day. The other whispers who you might be at night. You pass a sundial, useless in the dark but elegant, a symbol of time passing. Even when you're not measuring it, you wonder how many footsteps have worn this path into smoothness. How many sleepless souls have wandered here, pretending it was leisure and not necessity. The truth is, the garden was a coping mechanism. A beautiful one, yes, but still a way to manage the ache of too many hours and too few distractions. The Victorians didn't have podcasts or streaming or melatonin gummies. They had moonlight, and roses, and the quiet performance of being fine. You round a corner and find a small, circular lawn. At its center, a single white bench beneath a flowering dogwood tree. You sit and look up. The branches sway gently, the blossoms fluttering like moths. There's no one else here. Just you, the tree, and the gentle hum of a world pretending to sleep. And for a moment, you understand it. The appeal, the ritual, the control. In a world of rigid expectations and sleepless nights, the garden offered a space where everything bloomed on your schedule. Where time slowed, where beauty didn't demand explanation. Where you could be awake and still be at peace. You rise from the white bench beneath the dogwood, stretching your arms and hearing the soft crackle of your joints in the quiet. The garden has shifted again. You feel it. Less ornamental now, less preened and powdered. You're moving into the realm of the truly nocturnal, where nature doesn't just endure the night, it thrives in it. Ahead, a narrow gravel path winds through a grove of low-hanging trees. Their leaves are dark, waxy, catching glints of moonlight like scattered jewels. You smell something new, sweet, almost spicy and vaguely citrus. You follow the scent, ducking under a trellis, and into a clearing filled with strange, luminous blooms. They're glowing, not literally, but they seem to catch every sliver of light and throw it back with a theatrical flair. Welcome to the domain of the night bloomers. This is the part of the garden built not for people, but for plants that defy the rules of day and sleep. You crouch beside a moonflower, its petals wide, white as porcelain, edges curled like lace. It only opens after dark, and by dawn, it will close again, as if embarrassed by its own exuberance. There's a whole cast of these nocturnal botanicals, evening primroses that burst open in a matter of seconds, night phlox that smell like honey and cloves, and jasmine, which waits until the heat of the day fades to release its perfume. It's like a floral cabaret. Everyone's asleep, but these performers are just getting started. The Victorians were obsessed with these plants. They collected them, bred them, wrote about them in breathless prose. The moonflower alone was a sensation. Imagine it a bloom so dramatic it unfurls while you watch, like a magician pulling silk from an invisible sleeve. People held moonflower watching parties. Yes, that's a real thing. Guests would gather in the garden, sipping tea or something stronger, waiting for the precise moment the bloom opened. And when it did, a collective gasp, as if the flower had just proposed marriage. Historians still argue whether these gatherings were more about the botany or the social posturing. But honestly, does it matter? A little spectacle, a little science, a little sleeplessness. Classic Victorian cocktail. You stroll past a stand of Nicotiana, tall, willowy, with trumpet-shaped flowers that emit a perfume so rich and sweet it's almost dizzying. The Victorians adored this plant despite, or maybe because of, its association with tobacco. It was considered sensual, dangerous, even. And that, of course, only made it more popular. There's something inherently rebellious about these night-blooming plants. They refuse to conform. They won't open under the sun's watchful eye. They wait for the dark, for the quiet, for the moments when most of the world is dreaming. And in that, perhaps, the insomniac Victorians saw a kind of kinship. You find a small wooden sign tucked into a bed of flowering tobacco, for those who bloom when others sleep. You smile. That's the vibe, isn't it? Not just for the plants, but for their caretakers. The sleepless gardeners who found purpose in pruning and planting at hours when society said they should be resting. You pause beside a large potted datura. Angels trumpet again, its enormous pendulous flowers glowing in the moonlight. The plant is breathtaking, also mildly toxic, which feels, honestly, very on brand. The Victorians didn't just want beauty, they wanted beauty with an edge. Flowers that blossomed in defiance of the day. Plants that hinted at danger, at mystery, at the unknown. You imagine a woman in a high, collared dress standing here, holding a lantern, her eyes fixed on the datura, as if it might whisper secrets. Maybe it does. Maybe in the stillness of night, when the world finally quiets down, plants say the things people can't. And then there's the sound. The night garden hums. Not loudly, but persistently. Crickets, maybe. The soft hiss of leaves in the breeze. Somewhere you swear you hear a bloom creak open. It's hypnotic. You sit on a low stone ledge beside a bed of 4 o'clocks. Bright, trumpet-shaped flowers that come in wild splashes of pink, yellow, and white. They were a favorite in Victorian moon gardens, not just for their scent but for their timing. They opened late and stayed open well into the night, like the kind of friend who always answers your 2 a.m. text. You trail your fingers through the leaves and think about how much effort went into these gardens. Night-blooming plants require care. You can't just scatter seeds and hope for the best. You have to understand light cycles, soil types, watering patterns. You have to know when they'll bloom and for how long. It's an art, a quiet, stubborn kind of devotion. And yet, there's also whimsy here. A kind of gentle madness. Who else but a sleep-deprived romantic would design an entire garden to be seen by moonlight? Who else would plant flowers that no one sees unless they're awake at very questionable hours? It takes a certain kind of person. And the Victorians were absolutely that kind. You move deeper into the bloom. The air is thick with scent now, heady and disorienting. It's like walking through a perfume bottle. You feel a little drunk on it, not unpleasantly so, just enough to make the edges of things blur. There's a bench here, half hidden beneath a curtain of night, blooming jasmine. You sit. The petals brush your shoulder like a secret. You close your eyes. Around you things move. Slowly, plants shifting in the breeze, petals unfurling. A moth flits past your ear, big as a silver dollar. It hovers over the moonflower and dives in, vanishing into the bloom like a magician's trick gone right. That's the other thing about these plants. They're not blooming for you. They're blooming for the pollinators of the night moths, bats, even nocturnal beetles. The garden, it turns out, has its own nightlife. You wonder how many sleepless Victorians sat here, watching the same dance, breathing the same perfume, wondering if they'd ever feel tired again. Some probably didn't care anymore. If you couldn't sleep, at least you could be among things that chose the night. It made the insomnia feel less lonely. And maybe that's the point of all this. The moonflowers, the jasmine, the perfumed air, they weren't just aesthetic. They were company. Companions for those long hours when the world forgot you were still awake. You lean back, eyes half closed, and let the scent wrap around you. Somewhere, a clock chimes. 2 a.m., maybe 3. The garden doesn't care. It's still blooming. So are you. You rise slowly from the jasmine, draped bench, careful not to disturb the petals now clinging to your sleeve like sleepy confetti. The air here is quieter, more delicate. You notice it immediately. The subtle shift in energy, the softened footfalls, the careful hush that feels less like secrecy and more like reverence. You've entered the realm of the Victorian woman, but not the tea, sipping, needlepoint, stitching archetype you might expect. No. These are the ladies in the lavender shadows, the ones who slip out the back door when the house grows still, who trade corsets for gardening gloves and propriety for peace. You tread gently now, as if intruding on a sacred rite, and in a way you are. There's a soft rustle near the arbor. A figure moves, lantern in hand, the flame dancing across her features. Her hair is half pinned, her boots practical. She's humming low and absent-minded. You pause, letting her pass without a word. Because here's the thing for many Victorian women, night gardening wasn't just an eccentric hobby. It was freedom. By day, their lives were tightly corseted, literally and figuratively. Rules, expectations, appearances. But by night, when the candles were blown out and the eyes of society turned inward, that's when they came alive. In the garden, in the dirt, in full bloom. You walk the path she just left, catching the scent of crushed thyme beneath her steps. It mingles with lavender and the bitter tang of rue. These weren't accidental choices. Women in the Victorian era often selected plants with meaning, coded messages hidden in petals and stems. Lavender for devotion, thyme for courage, rue for regret. The garden became a diary written in flowers, one that no one could censor. Historians still argue whether these nighttime pursuits were acts of quiet rebellion or simply the byproduct of insomnia and boredom. But the truth lies somewhere in the middle, as it so often does. Yes, they were awake, but what they did with that wakefulness, that was intentional. Take, for instance, the garden gowns. They weren't advertised as such, of course. But if you look closely at fashion plates and women's journals of the time, you'll find subtle nods to nocturnal elegance, soft slippers, unbuttoned bodices, shawls large enough to double as cloaks. Nothing scandalous, just practical and comfortable. A quiet refusal to be uncomfortable everywhere, always. Imagine Lady Beatrice, wide awake at midnight, slipping into her dressing gown and quietly unlatching the kitchen door. She doesn't want to wake the household. She just wants to check on the moonflowers. Maybe deadhead a few petunias. Maybe cry a little near the foxglove. She doesn't need a reason. She just needs space. You turn a corner and find a small circular bed of herbs, arranged like a clock. Each section holds a different plant: lemon balm, chamomile, motherwort, feverfew. A witch's wheel, some might call it. But in Victorian England, it was usually just labelled eccentric. Women who dabbled in herbalism were both admired and side-eyed, especially if they didn't have a doctor, husband, to explain it all away. And yet they persisted. Because in a world that gave them so little autonomy, the garden offered control over their bodies, their minds, their time. You couldn't choose your husband, perhaps, but you could choose to plant bluebells in the shade and marigolds in full sun. You could grow something of your own. You pause beside a stone bench, its surface worn smooth. Etched into the side are initials, E.B., July 1871. You wonder if she came out here to rest, or to dream, or to write. Many women did. In the quiet of the garden, words came easier. Diaries, poems, letters never sent. The night garden was a muse, and women, freed from the gaze of tutors and husbands and etiquette manuals, finally had room to create. You hear a soft laugh, not mocking, joyful. Somewhere nearby, two women sit cross-legged in the grass, lit by a single lantern, sharing tea, or secrets, or both. You don't approach them, you don't need to. Their presence is enough. A reminder that for some Victorian women, the night garden was also a place of connection, away from the drawing rooms and the dinner parties. Here, they could be real. You pass a trellis wrapped in clematis, its blooms soft and star-like. There's a plaque beneath it planted for Alice, who never liked the sun. You don't know who Alice was, but you understand her instinct. The sun exposed, the night embraced. There's a myth that Victorian women were delicate, passive, ornamental. But the garden tells a different story. These women were tending things, pruning, propagating. They understood soil pH and bloom cycles. They read the cottage gardener and the floricultural cabinet. They didn't just wander among the roses, they grew them. And in doing so, they claimed something rare: solitude. In a society where privacy was scarce and roles were rigid, the garden became a sanctuary. A place to unlace the corset, both literally and metaphorically. To breathe deeply without anyone commenting on the size of your waist. You reach a small greenhouse tucked between hedges. Inside, you glimpse a woman adjusting the vents, checking the condensation. She's middle-aged, hair pulled back. You leave the lavender shadows behind, stepping over a low stone threshold that separates one part of the garden from another. Immediately, the mood shifts. The path is harder here, flagstones instead of gravel. The plants stand taller, sterner, less fussy. No lacy lavender or weeping vines. Just the orderly discipline of yew hedges, dark, leafed laurels and boxwoods trimmed with military precision. This is the men's section. You wouldn't know it from a sign. Victorian gardens didn't post those kinds of things. But you can feel it. Less whimsy, more structure. Less perfume, more purpose. You walk past a rack of gardening tools, neatly arranged long-handled spades, brass sprayers, and shears so well maintained they practically gleam in the moonlight. A pair of gloves rests beside them, large and leather, not for show, for digging. A cough echoes from behind a hedge. You pause. A moment later, a man in a waistcoat and shirt sleeves emerges, carrying a lantern in one hand and a small trowel in the other. His cravat is loose, his brow damp. He nods at you briefly, then returns to his task, kneeling beside a raised bed, gently pressing down soil around what looks to be a young fig tree. This is not a hobby. This is a ritual. For many Victorian men, night gardening was an escape, not from domestic duties or corseted expectations, but from the crushing weight of productivity. Daylight hours were for business, for competition, for stoicism. But at night, in the privacy of a garden, you could loosen your collar, literally and metaphorically. You stroll past a row of espaliered pear trees, their limbs trained flat against a brick wall like botanical sculptures. It's meticulous, time-consuming, a project that requires patience, a virtue that didn't always find space in the boardroom or the courtroom, but flourished here in the soil. Historians still argue whether male gardeners of the night were genuinely seeking peace, or simply displacing their anxieties into something manageable. But it's hard to ignore how many journals and letters from the period mention men slipping into the garden after dark, not to supervise but to work, to dig, to plant, to prune, to feel something real under their hands. You stop beside a compost heap, neatly contained in a wooden bin. It doesn't smell, not really, just the rich aroma of decay and rebirth. There's a book resting on the edge, The Practical Gardener, its spine cracked, pages marked with notes in a tight, tidy script. You pick it up and read a margin scribble. Sleep eludes me, but the soil listens. You smile. That tracks. There's something deeply grounding, pun fully intended, about gardening. It reconnects you to rhythms that aren't dictated by clocks or profit margins. And for Victorian men, raised to be rational, efficient, and restrained. The act of kneeling in the dirt and coaxing life from the earth was quietly radical. You round a corner and find a man sitting on a low bench, his hat in his lap, coat draped beside him. He's older, with silver hair and hands stained with soil. He's not doing anything now, just sitting, watching the moon move behind the clouds. You don't disturb him. He's deep in thought. Or memory. Or both. There's a myth that Victorian masculinity meant emotionlessness, but the garden says otherwise. Here in the secrecy of night, men cried. They wrote poetry. They pressed flowers into books and collected seeds in labelled jars. The garden was a place to be soft in a world that punished softness. You pass a small glasshouse, its panes fogged with condensation. Inside, rows of seedlings stretch toward the ceiling, lit gently by lanterns, tomatoes perhaps, or cucumbers, practical crops, men's crops, not for beauty, but for purpose. You can almost hear the voice of a middle-aged man explaining to his skeptical brother-in-law that no, he doesn't grow flowers, just food, like a real man. And yet when no one's looking, he pauses to admire the delicate curve of a tomato blossom. You chuckle. Victorian masculinity was complicated. You step into a shaded alcove lined with ivy and ferns. At its center sits a stone pedestal with a single white collar lily in a vase. No label, no plaque, just the flower. You wonder who placed it there. A memorial, a symbol, maybe just a moment of beauty for someone who needed it. And then, just past the alcove, you find something unexpected. A small mound of recently turned earth. It's neat, deliberate. Not a grave, but something ceremonial. A planting, perhaps. Or a burial of sorts, a time capsule, maybe. A bottle with a letter. A photograph. Yes, a bone. You spot a corner of it, half exposed at the edge of the soil. You freeze. Victorian gardens were full of surprises. Occasionally, those surprises were human remains. No, really. Especially on older estates, where family burials sometimes took place right in the garden. And then there were the amateur naturalists, men who collected bones, skulls, and fossils like trophies. Some even buried them deliberately, only to rediscover them later. Like staging a personal archaeological dig. A bit dramatic, yes. Very on brand, also yes. You step back from the mound, letting it be. Whatever it is, it's part of the story now. You hear something, rustling, not threatening, just movement. Another man with a lantern, perhaps, or maybe a hedgehog. Either way, you're reminded that the garden at night isn't empty. It's inhabited. By the living. By the restless. By those looking for something they can't name. You walk on, the path narrowing, the hedges closing in slightly. The scent of damp soil clings to you now. Your hands brush leaves as you go. You pass a bench with an old gardening journal left open to a page titled Reflections at 2 a.m. The handwriting is shaky and elegant. One line reads, "I dig not for the garden's sake, but for my own." And that's it, isn't it? For the Victorian man, the night garden wasn't about impressing dinner guests or cultivating exotic blooms. It was about silence, control, ritual. It was something to do with your hands when your thoughts wouldn't stop. A place to put grief, or love, or restlessness. A place where no one expected you to be anything other than what you were, awake and trying your best. You step back into the open path, the moonlight filtering through the trees. The garden breathes with you. And in the distance, the sound of shears again. Click, click, as another insomniac turns their sleeplessness into something green. You follow the faint rhythmic snip of those shears, deeper into the garden's belly. The path curls like a lazy smoke ribbon, edged with low stone lanterns that haven't been lit in years. Vines crawl up their sides like time itself trying to erase them. But you're not here for the lanterns. You're here for the voices, soft, laughing, possibly tipsy. Drifting in on the breeze like perfume, you're approaching one of the more curious contradictions of the Victorian era, the gaslight garden party. Because while many night gardeners sought solitude, quiet contemplation, or botanical salvation, others took a very different approach. They turned their insomnia into an event. You duck beneath a wisteria arch and step into a clearing bathed in warm golden light. Gas lamps flicker on tall, wrought iron stands like sleepy sentinels. A table is set with mismatched china, its floral patterns glowing faintly in the lamplight. There's a teapot, probably not just tea, half empty, and a plate of what looks like scones or possibly yesterday's biscuits. A gramophone hums softly nearby, playing something slow and string heavy. And there they are, three figures lounging in garden chairs, wrapped in shawls and cravats, laughing over something that was either very witty or very absurd. One of them raises a teacup in your direction, toasting your arrival like you've just walked into a salon in the Twilight Zone. This is not your usual garden party. It's not about gossip or fashion. It's about being awake together, in the dark, under the stars, with enough tea and brandy to keep the ghosts at bay. Historians still argue whether these gaslight garden salons were widespread or just poetic anomalies, eccentric footnotes in journals or novels. But documented or not, they happened. Enough letters and diaries hint at them: the midnight poetry readings, the out-loud diary entries, the impromptu philosophical debates that always seem to happen just after the third pot of tea. You stroll into the circle and take a seat. No one minds. The energy here is loose, languid. People speak in half whispers, as if afraid to wake the flowers. One woman with unruly curls reads aloud from a book resting on her knees. It's Byron, of course. She walks in beauty, like the night she stops mid-line sighing. Too obvious, she mutters, and tosses the book aside in favor of a biscuit. You sip from a cup someone hands you. It's definitely not tea. It burns a little, but in a warm, agreeable way. Around you, the garden glows with a soft, golden haze. The gaslight flickers, casting long shadows that dance like spirits across the hedges. And speaking of spirits, yes, the Victorians were into that too. Seances, ghost sightings, spectral theories. The night garden was the perfect setting for a little spiritualism. You can almost hear it now, the creak of a planchette on a spirit board, the dramatic gasp of a guest who's definitely felt a cold hand brush their shoulder. You glance toward the edge of the clearing where a smaller table is set up with candles, mirrors, and a bell jar containing something that might be a moth, or just an overambitious beetle. These weren't just parties. They were rituals, experiments in the liminal. The Victorians loved the idea that the veil between worlds was thinner at night. And in the garden, with the scent of night, blooming jasmine in the air, and the gaslight casting trembling shadows, anything felt possible. You hear someone mention the ghost in the rose arbor, and everyone laughs a little too hard for it to be just a joke. But not all the laughter here is nervous. Some of it is real, deep belly laughter. The kind that only erupts when you're tired enough to forget your filters. The kind that makes you lean back in your chair and forget, just for a moment, that you haven't slept properly in weeks. You wander a bit, leaving the circle and stepping behind a hedge into another part of the garden. The party echoes behind you like a dream. Ahead you find a small marble stage, barely a platform really. A few empty chairs sit in orderly rows, and a lantern sways above as if waiting for an encore. You imagine the scene. A midnight poetry reading. A nervous young man reciting Tennyson by memory. A woman heckling gently with a line of Shelley. Someone clapping with gloved hands just loud enough to be supportive, but not enough to startle the moths. These were not just social gatherings. They were reclamations of time, of space, of identity. The sleepless came together not to mourn their insomnia, but to celebrate what it gave them, hours that belonged to no one else. A chance to gather, speak, and be seen without the harsh judgment of daylight. You sit in one of the empty chairs and look up. The sky is slightly clearer now. A handful of stars peek through the haze. You wonder if someone once stood on this very spot and read a line that made a small group of people fall reverently silent. Not because it was perfect, but because it was shared. And that's the thing about sleeplessness. It's isolating. Unless you find someone else who's awake, you return to the main clearing. The party is quieter now. One man has dozed off in his chair, a shawl pulled over his knees. Another scribbles in a notebook, occasionally stopping to stare dramatically into the middle distance. The woman with the curls is plucking petals from a daisy with theatrical despair. Love me not. Though she's clearly on her third daisy, and well past the point of seriousness. You take one last sip of not tea and feel the warmth settle in your chest. Not just the drink, but the moment. The shared oddness of it all. The fact that someone decided this was the best use of their insomnia. And honestly, it kind of is. You stand and wander back toward the path, the gaslight fading behind you. The laughter and murmurs dwindle into a hush, like a book closing. The party continues, but you carry its glow with you now, a little lantern in your chest. Because somewhere between the poetry and the biscuits, you've realized something: the night garden isn't just a place of solitude. It's a place of connection. A strange, flickering space where people find each other in the dark and say, "You too. You're still awake too," and that's enough. You walk away from the fading glow of the gaslight party, your footsteps muffled by moss and memory. The night air feels different now, Cooler, sharper, touched with the faintest edge of dew. The garden has quieted again. The laughter and teacups are behind you. Ahead lies only stillness, and something else: air. Cool, crisp, and surprisingly clean. You pause on a narrow bridge arched over a tiny stream, the water below reflecting the moonlight like a silver ribbon. You breathe in deeply. And unlike the coal, choked daytime air of Victorian cities, this breath feels almost pure. But if you were a Victorian, you might hesitate. Because in your hand, stitched boots and high, collared coat, you've been told all your life that night air is dangerous. You lean on the bridge's railing and exhale slowly. The chill feels good, clears your head. But in the 19th century, this simple act might have been considered a health risk. That's right, Victorians feared the very air you're breathing now, especially after dark. It all comes down to one word: miasma. The prevailing medical theory for much of the 19th century claimed that diseases were spread by bad air, foul smells, rotting matter, and the thick, damp fog that rolled in after sunset. Miasma was blamed for everything from cholera to tuberculosis. And because the night air was cooler and often carried the scent of decay more boldly, it was seen as particularly suspect. Historians still argue whether this fear was rooted in genuine empirical observation, or just a very elaborate way of explaining why everyone kept getting sick in cities that dumped sewage into the street. Either way, it had consequences. Windows were kept shut at night, curtains drawn, bedchambers sealed tight. People feared drafts like modern folks fear data leaks. Entire architectural choices were influenced by the idea that night air could kill you. And yet, despite all that, here you are, surrounded by people who have not only chosen to be outside after dark, but inhaled deeply while doing it. You follow the path into a clearing where a few chairs are arranged in a circle. No gas lamps here, only the moon and a few fireflies doing their best impression of fairy lights. A man sits with an open collar and a thick wool blanket wrapped around his legs. He's staring at the stars, or at least where the stars should be, if the smog hadn't smudged them into oblivion. He sees you and smiles. "The air's better here," he says softly. "Out in the garden, not like in the house, stuffy in there. The walls breathe slower than I do." You nod, you understand. Because at some point, some Victorians began to question the orthodoxy of miasma theory. Not loudly. No one likes to be the first to admit the emperor might be coughing because his windows are sealed, but subtly, quietly, through experience. And one of the first places that doubt took root was in the garden. The garden didn't smell of rot. It smelled of soil, herbs, rain, flowers. It was alive, which, paradoxically, made it feel safe. You pass a hedge of rosemary and sage, the scent bursting with every brush of your sleeve. These were planted deliberately, not just for cooking, but for purification. Rosemary was believed to cleanse the air. Basil, too. Even lavender, with its sweet perfume, was said to calm the body and protect against the mysterious night vapors. You crouch beside a plant with silvery leaves. Artemisia, sometimes called wormwood. Used in absinthe ashore, but also favored in sachets and sleep pillows. You pluck a leaf and rub it between your fingers. Its scent is sharp, medicinal. You imagine a sleepless Victorian woman tucking a few sprigs into her pillowcase, hoping for dreams that weren't haunted by unpaid bills and societal expectations. And then there were the night walks, another quiet rebellion. Doctors may have warned against night air, but the insomniacs, they walked anyway. Wrapped in cloaks, shawls, or thick coats, they wandered their gardens and estates, breathing in the forbidden freshness of the evening. Some called it madness, others called it necessity. You sit on a low bench carved with ivy motifs and take another deep breath. The air smells like wet stone and honeysuckle. You're not sick. You're not cursed. You're alive, awake, present. You think of Florence Nightingale. Yes, that Nightingale, who famously kept her hospital windows open despite miasma fears. She believed in fresh air, clean linens, and good ventilation. Radical stuff, back then. And she wasn't alone. Slowly others followed. The tide began to turn. But old fears don't vanish overnight, even as germ theory gained traction. Even as doctors began to look at microbes instead of mists, the fear of night air lingered. You pass a small gazebo, where someone's left behind a wool-lapped blanket and a half-read volume of the Lancet. A page is dog-eared, its text underlined, the use of fresh air in the treatment of the nervous insomnia. You smile. Progress, one footnote at a time. You hear the distant hoot of an owl, soft and muted. A breeze stirs the leaves, and they rustle like an old book being slowly flipped open. The garden breathes. And for the first time in a while, so do you. You think of all the Victorians who ignored the warnings, who stepped outside, clutching shawls and lanterns, and breathed despite the fear. They didn't have the science, perhaps, but they knew the truth in their bones. The garden healed them. Maybe not in the way doctors recorded, but in the way that mattered. The night air wasn't dangerous. It was freedom. You rise, stretch, and walk on. The path ahead is lined with lemon balm and evening primrose. The breeze picks up again, teasing at your sleeves. You breathe in long and slow. No fear. No miasma. Just the cool kiss of a night that welcomes you, strange and sleepless as you are. You follow the curve of the path as it slips into a quieter, more open part of the garden. The hedges drop away, and the trees thin out, revealing an expanse of lawn silvered by moonlight. The grass moves like a tide with the breeze, rippling gently under your feet. There's a stillness here that feels different, less like sleep, more like waiting. Above, the moon is high and full, casting its pale glow across the garden's face. You pause, bathed in that cold, soft light, and it feels strange. Not just luminous, but present, like it's watching you watch it. You're not the only one who's noticed. Victorians had a complicated relationship with the moon. Reverent, fearful, enchanted. They called it romantic, medicinal, and occasionally downright dangerous. You continue walking, and you can feel that subtle tension in the garden around you, like everything's holding its breath beneath the lunar gaze. And this is where it gets a bit weird, in the best possible way, because for all their rationality and empire-building gusto, Victorians also believed the moon could mess you up, not just in a poetic, "oh, I'm so in love I can't sleep" sort of way. No, they thought the moon could physically alter your body, your mind, your soul. You crouch beside a bed of lunaria, also known as honesty. Its flat, silvery seed pods gleam faintly, like tiny moons scattered across the ground. It's no coincidence it's planted here. This part of the garden is built for moonlight. You can see it in the plant choice's white blossoms, pale leaves, reflective paths. This is a moon garden in the most literal sense, a space designed not just to survive moonlight, but to worship it. You pass a small sundial, unused at this hour, and spot a second. Smaller dial nearby. It's labeled Lunar Chart. Etched into the stone around its base are the moon's phases, each one paired with a gardening tip: plant root vegetables during waning, harvest herbs at full. You run your fingers over the worn letters. Someone believed in this, enough to carve it in stone. Historians still debate whether these lunar gardening practices were based on observable patterns or simply centuries of lore passed down through muddy boots and whispered advice. But even the skeptics admit, sometimes things grew better when planted with the moon. You follow a moonlit path lined with silver thyme and white alyssum. The scent is subtle but persistent, like the garden itself is breathing softly beside you. The Victorians believed the moon's light had specific qualities: cooling, calming, clarifying. Some doctors even prescribed moonbathing for nervous conditions. You picture it now: a well-dressed man reclining on a lounge chair in his garden at midnight, letting the full moon wash over him like a Victorian spa treatment. Of course, there were warnings too. You pass a low stone bench beside a plot of pale peonies. Carved into its side are the words "Beware the lunacy." And that's not just poetic drama. They were serious. The term lunatic literally stems from luna, the Latin word for moon. The belief that moonlight could drive a person mad was widespread, even institutionalized. Some Victorian asylums kept patients indoors during full moons. Others noted spikes in erratic behavior that, rightly or wrongly, were attributed to lunar influence. You sit on the bench and look up. The moon is so bright it casts shadows. You can see your own stretching long across the grass, like a second self. It's easy to understand how people might have felt a little off under this kind of light. It's beautiful, yes, but also strange, alien, like being lit from the inside out. And then there's the idea of moonstroke, a condition some Victorian physicians claimed was caused by overexposure to moonlight. Symptoms included fatigue, dizziness, confusion, and a sudden urge to write poetry. Okay, not that last part, but still, the fear was real. Some people wore hats at night. Others carried parasols, not for sun, but for the moon. You chuckle to yourself. Imagine explaining that at a dinner party. "Oh, I'm terribly sorry, I can't stay long. I've already had my full dose of moon." Still, not everyone feared the lunar touch. For artists, poets, and the particularly sleepless, the moon was a muse. Entire journals were filled with moonlit sketches, moon-inspired verses, and long, rambling thoughts scribbled under its glow. The night garden became a kind of natural observatory. a place to watch the moon rise and fall, to track its phases, to time one's planting or one's confessions. You stroll past a small reflecting pool, perfectly round, framed in white stones. The moon floats on its surface like a coin in a wishing well. Someone's placed a single lily in the center, its petals open wide. You lean over and catch your reflection mingled with the moon's. For a moment, it's hard to tell where you end and it begins. You wonder how many Victorians stood right here, just like this, wondering if the moon could see them back. Wondering if their insomnia was simply lunar gravity tugging at their nerves. Wondering if the moonlight made their thoughts clearer, or just stranger. You step away from the pool and continue down the path, now lined with moonwort and lunaria. The plants here shimmer faintly. They don't need the sun. They've learned to thrive in silver. You come upon a small stone circle, half hidden in the grass. 5 or 6 flat stones arranged like petals. A gathering place, sacred maybe, or just sentimental. Either way, it feels intentional. You sit in the center, legs folded. The moon overhead like a watchful eye. And you breathe. You feel the coolness of the air, the weightlessness of the light. You imagine yourself not as a visitor, but as part of the garden. Another living thing the moon has chosen to illuminate. You think of all the insomniacs who came before you, those who wandered these same paths, who feared the moon even as they chased it, who wrote about it, prayed under it, blamed it for their sleeplessness, and thanked it for their clarity. And you realize, the moon didn't cause their insomnia. It made it worthwhile. You rise from the moonlit circle, brushing stray blades of grass from your lap. The moon is still high, but something in the air has shifted. Not the temperature, it's still cool and pleasant, but a feeling. Like you've crossed an unseen threshold. The garden, once merely strange and beautiful, now hums with something deeper, more esoteric. You feel it on your skin before you even realize you're heading toward it. The part of the garden where things grow differently. You step through a break in the hedge and into a space that doesn't announce itself so much as reveal itself. At first glance, it looks like any other section, winding paths, low borders, carefully tended beds. But then you notice the symbols carved into the stones. The arrangement of plants in peculiar, star-like patterns. The way each flower bed seems to point somewhere else. This is where the night garden tips into the occult. Welcome to the world of cults, circles, and celestial seeds. You're not in polite society anymore. You pass a circle of white stones, each one etched with a different alchemical symbol. At its center, a bundle of dried herbs tied with red twine rests on a small pedestal. This isn't just decorative, it's a spell, or a charm, or a ward, depending on who planted it and what they were trying to keep out. Victorians had an insatiable appetite for the mystical. Secret societies were everywhere. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, the Society for Psychical Research, the Theosophical Society. Some met in drawing rooms. In gardens like this one under the stars, in robes stitched with planetary symbols and pockets full of crushed valerian root. You walk past a bed of starflowers, each bloom open wide. They're arranged in spiral rows, not for aesthetics but for alignment. Astrological, perhaps. Someone believed that planting under certain constellations would yield stronger blooms, more vivid colors, deeper magic. And who's to say they were wrong? Historians still argue whether these practices were serious belief systems or elaborate Victorian cosplay. But belief or not, the rituals were real. People gathered beneath the moon to plant by Saturn's influence, to harvest under Venus, to bury copper coins beside rose bushes for love spells, or to keep away unwanted suitors, depending on the desired outcome. You stop at a low wooden sign painted in careful script: Moonseed Grove, do not ingest. You blink. Moonseed is toxic, yes, but also symbolic. In some circles, it was thought to enhance dream clarity. In others, to open the third eye. Whatever that was supposed to mean in a culture that believed fainting on a sofa was a perfectly reasonable response to bad news. You crouch beside the plant. Its dark berries gleam like ink droplets. You resist the urge to touch them. You begin to notice the geometry here, the sacred shapes hidden in plain sight. A triangle of lavender, a pentagram of yew hedges, a crescent-shaped bed of white tulips. It's not random. Someone designed this with intent. Not just a gardener, a practitioner. You hear a voice. Low, rhythmic, chanting, singing. You can't tell. You follow the sound and find a woman standing in a small clearing, arms raised toward the sky. She's barefoot, her hair loose. In her hand, a bundle of smoldering herbs. Sage, mugwort. The smoke curls upward, catching the moonlight like silk. You don't interrupt. This moment is not for you. Victorian women, especially those with access to education but denied positions of real authority, often turned to spiritualism and the occult. It gave them power, symbolic, social, personal. In the garden, under cover of darkness, they could embody roles denied to them during the day: priestess, healer, oracle. You move on, stepping between twin beds of vervain and rue, plants known for ritual use. Protection, purification, divination. They're not here because they're beautiful. They're here because they mean something. You pause at a stone basin filled with water. It's perfectly still. On the surface, a scattering of flower petals, chamomile, rose, calendula, a scrying bowl, used for seeing visions, or at least pretending to. You lean over, expecting your reflection. But the moon is positioned just right, and all you see is its glow, rippling gently on the surface. It feels like looking into another world. You hear laughter behind you, soft but knowing. You turn, but no one's there. That's the thing about this part of the garden. It plays with the line between the real and the imagined. And the Victorians were fine with that. They didn't need scientific proof. They needed meaning. And if the stars and the soil and a bit of night air could give them that, they were all in. You pass a low trellis covered in night jasmine and see something tucked into its base. A small book, leather-bound, its pages filled with a looping, elegant hand. Notes, formulas, observations on bloom times and planetary alignments. One page reads, "Planted mugwort under the waning moon. Dreams are clearer. Saw my mother. She said nothing but smiled." You close the book gently and put it back. You reach the edge of this strange little grove and find a stone bench shaped like a crescent moon. You sit. Above, the stars twinkle behind the haze, faint but persistent. Someone has strung tiny bells from the branches overhead. They tinkle softly whenever the breeze stirs. And you realize something. For all its eccentricity, this part of the garden isn't about spectacle. It's about intention. About creating sacredness in a world that often denied it. A space where insomnia wasn't just endured, it was channeled into rituals, into meaning, into a belief that maybe, just maybe, the universe was listening. You look up again, the moon resting just above the treetops now, full and round and watching. You don't feel silly, you feel seen. And that's what the Victorians wanted too. In their robes and circles, with their sacred seeds and whispered chants, they wanted to be seen, to matter, to believe that the restless hours held something more than just silence. So they planted, they chanted, they dreamed with their eyes open, and the garden bloomed. You leave the crescent moon bench behind, the faint chime of bells still echoing in your ears like a lullaby you're not quite ready to forget. The garden quiets again as you move forward, the path narrowing into a corridor of tall hedges and whispering vines. It feels more intimate here. Not secretive like the occult grove, but personal. Like you've stepped into someone's story. And in a way you have. You round a bend and come upon a small, neatly arranged flowerbed. At first glance, it's just a patch of blooms. Modest, a little wild around the edges. But then your eyes catch the pattern. Not in the petals, but in the placement. A row of violets. A cluster of white camellias. A lone yellow rose. You pause. This isn't just gardening. This is language. Welcome to the hidden world of floriography. The Victorian obsession with assigning meaning to flowers. In this part of the night garden, every bloom speaks. Every color, every pairing, every placement is a sentence waiting to be read. You crouch beside the bed, mentally translating. Violets, modesty. White camellia, admiration. Yellow rose, jealousy. A complicated message, if accidental, but you doubt it is. Nothing in this garden ever seems to be. You move on, and the flower beds multiply, each one more elaborate than the last. Some are bordered by neat stones, others left to spill over walkways like confessions too heavy to stay contained. You pass a heart-shaped bed of forget-me. Knots, not subtle. A trellis covered in honeysuckle and ivy, bonds of affection and fidelity, respectively. And then, a lonely pot of marigolds, their orange petals glowing in the moonlight like tiny flames. Grief unspoken. It's a love letter. Or maybe a breakup letter. Or both. Historians still argue whether floriography was truly used in everyday life or just a romantic fiction cooked up by poets and publishers. But the evidence lingers in diaries, in art, in the pages of those little handbooks with titles like The Floral Oracle or The Language of Flowers, a token of affection. You find one now, resting on a wrought iron bench. The spine is cracked, the page is well thumbed. Someone's been using it. Inside, flowers are pressed between the pages like ghosts, pansy, rosemary, lily of the valley. Thought, remembrance, return of happiness. You run your fingers over them as if they might whisper their secrets. And yes, you're starting to see it. This garden isn't just a place, it's a letter. Written in petals and pollen. A message from someone who couldn't sleep, who needed to say something without ever saying it aloud. You pass a bed of mixed blooms arranged in a spiral. At the center a single deep red rose, love of course, but surrounded by bluebells constancy, daisies innocence, and chrysanthemums truth. It's a confession blooming right there in the soil. You wonder who it was for. Someone who would understand. Someone who'd never know. The Victorians were masters of coded emotion, public stoicism, private longing, and when words failed, or propriety forbade them, the garden spoke for them. Especially at night, when the rules relaxed and the petals opened. You continue down the path and find a small arbor, its frame wrapped in climbing roses. Inside a stone table, etched into its surface are dozens of flower names carved in a careful hand. Beneath each, a single word: devotion, betrayal, passion, regret. It's a dictionary of desire. Written in granite, meant to last longer than any bouquet. Seated nearby is a figure, back turned, scribbling something into a notebook. You don't intrude. Writers live in their own weather systems. But as you pass, you glimpse the page, a sketch of a flower bed shaped like a teardrop, each section labeled with meanings. It's a poem. A map, a memory. You keep walking. Now you see it everywhere. The messages. A border of nasturtiums, a patriotism around a cluster of bleeding hearts, unrequited love. A hidden patch of basil and fennel, hate and strength. Oaf. Someone had a night. And then you come to the wall. It's low, made of weathered brick, and covered in creeping moss. But what stops you is the row of pots lined along the top, each one with a different flower. A rotating journal of emotion. Some pots are fresh, poppies, lavender, larkspur. Others are empty or left to dry out. You read the lineup like a sentence: regret, hope, silence, peace. It's not linear, just honest. You sit on the wall and let the garden speak to you. Not in words, but in scent and color and arrangement. This is the kind of communication that doesn't need punctuation. It just blooms. You wonder how many sleepless Victorians came here, night after night, planting their feelings in secret. Lovers who couldn't speak. Widows who couldn't cry. Friends who parted ways and needed to say one last thing without ever writing it down. You pass a patch of heliotrope, devotion, and think of the gardener who chose it. Was it a final plea? A daily prayer? A quiet acknowledgement of something they could never say? This part of the garden is the most human so far. Not mystical, not medicinal, just emotional. A safe place to be unraveled and still feel beautiful. You reach the end of the path and find a wooden box nailed to a post. Inside, slips of paper, messages, notes. Anonymous, unsigned, folded like petals. You pull one out. I'm sorry for what I couldn't be during the day. I hope you see me now. You put it back. You look around once more. The night is deep now. The moon has begun its slow descent. But the flowers remain, whispering to each other in the hush of pre-dawn. And you realize, the language of flowers wasn't just for others. It was for them, the gardeners, the insomniacs, the ones who needed to say it out loud, even if no one was listening. Because here, in the dark, the flowers always listen. You leave the flower, let a garden behind, your thoughts still tangled with the words that bloomed in silence. The path ahead is smoother now, worn by countless feet, boots, slippers, bare toes padding quietly under the stars. You feel it in the stones beneath you, a history pressed into earth not just by time, but by purpose. Because here's the thing no one quite expected when Victorians started wandering out into their gardens at 2 a.m. with laudanum, laced tea, and pruning shears. It changed things. At first, it was just a handful of eccentrics, insomniacs, widows, dreamers. But over time, something deeper took root. A transformation that no amount of fog, propriety, or ticking clocks could suppress. Night gardening, strange as it seemed, quietly fueled innovation, not just in horticulture but in design, science, even social progress. You stop at a fork in the path. One side leads toward a greenhouse glowing faintly from within. The other curves past a series of ornate garden beds, each more structured and stylized than the last. You take the second road, and as you walk you begin to notice the shift. The chaos of earlier gardens, wild herbs, secret symbols, emotionally coded flower beds, gives way to symmetry. Raised beds in perfect grids, companion planting, espaliered fruit trees running like living walls. This isn't just a place of beauty. It's a system. Victorians didn't just plant for pleasure. They studied. They experimented. And many of those experiments happened by moonlight, when the distractions of the day were gone. You crouch beside a bed of alternating rose, lavender and cabbage. Sage and beans. Clearly intentional. Companion planting, long practiced in folk gardening, was refined and recorded here. And not just by men in stiff waistcoats and monocles, though there were plenty of those, but by women. Amateurs, outsiders. People who couldn't sleep and figured they might as well try something new. Historians still argue whether the night garden was ever truly a laboratory or simply a retreat. But the evidence suggests both. Journals full of planting times, bloom patterns, soil experiments. Some of the earliest theories connecting moon phases to plant behavior were scribbled in the margins of sleepless gardeners' notebooks. You pass a small greenhouse, its door cracked open. Inside, the air is warm and damp. You step in and are hit with the scent of damp earth and citrus. Shelves line the walls, filled with labeled jars, seed packets, cuttings in glass vials. It's like a botanical apothecary. In the center, a table covered in sketches, sections of bulbs, diagrams of root systems, notes on hybridization. One reads, crossed night, blooming cereus with dwarf cactus. Blooms lasted 47 minutes longer. We'll try again next full moon. It's not a formal study, but it's research. The kind that doesn't care about credentials, only results. And that mindset, tinkering, testing, challenging the rules, bled into other areas. You walk back outside, past a low wall covered in ivy. Carved into the stone are the names of plants that were once considered exotic, now common thanks to Victorian obsession for chasia, chrysanthemum, hydrangea. The Victorians didn't just grow gardens, they globalized them, sometimes through trade, sometimes, let's be honest, through empire. But even at home, the restless ones, those up at odd hours, tending to fragile foreign shoots, were the ones pushing the boundaries. And then there's the design. You step into a section of the garden that looks like it belongs in a magazine. Borders echoing the lines of the house. A water feature placed precisely to reflect the moon from the parlor window. Garden rooms. Divided spaces. Flow. These weren't just flower beds, they were architectural statements. And many of them were imagined not by professional landscapers, but by people awake at night, sketching by candlelight, dreaming of how a path might lead the eye, or the heart. You pass a small table with a tea tray and a set of blueprints rolled up beside it. You unroll one carefully. It's a garden plan drawn in pencil. At the bottom, in elegant script, for those who wander when the world sleeps. You smile. That's you, isn't it? And then there's something else, a detail easy to miss. You notice the names. In journals, on plans, in the margins of botanical illustrations. So many of them are women. Women who couldn't attend university, who weren't allowed to publish under their own names, who were told to host tea parties instead of plant experiments. And yet, in these gardens under the moon, they did it anyway. And something stirred. The garden became a place where women taught each other. Shared seeds, shared knowledge, shared ideas. Some of those women went on to become unofficial experts. Some published anonymously. Others inspired daughters who did get to study. The roots of change were planted here, between the rows of moonflowers and rosemary. You pause beside a stone bench, half covered in moss. Next to it, a weathered plaque reads, "She planted in silence, but everything she touched grew louder." You sit and let that settle. Because the innovations weren't always grand or public. They were quiet, persistent, subtle as a vine breaking through stone. But they spread. Night gardening became a metaphor for reclaiming time, space, and identity. For saying, I may not sleep, but I will grow. You look around and realize how many of the things we now take for granted, raised beds, companion planting, moon, phase gardening, even some early forms of therapy gardening, were toyed with, tested, and nurtured by people who just couldn't sleep. And there's something beautiful about that. How insomnia, that restless ache, became a source of growth, how sleeplessness, so often painted as weakness, was turned into creativity, resilience, rebellion. You rise from the bench and walk slowly through the garden's final corridor. The path is lined with flowering shrubs, mock orange, lilac, viburnum. Their blooms are soft, their scent subtle. Not demanding attention, just offering it. You think of all the hands that shaped this place, night after night, each one contributing something. A new planting technique, a better path layout, a flower arrangement that whispered something no one else could say aloud. And you realize the garden was never just about insomnia. It was about what you do with it. You walk beneath an arch of climbing roses now, their blooms pale in the moonlight, petals beginning to wilt at the edges like tired thoughts. The garden is winding down, and so are you. The air has shifted again. Heavier now. Wetter, like the first whisper of dawn is somewhere just beyond the hedges, waiting to rise. But before the sun returns, there's one more chapter left to walk through. You come to a narrow path flanked by tall hedges, and beyond it quiet. Still, a smaller garden. Tamer. Almost forgotten. There's no gaslight here, no glowing greenhouse, no eccentric trellises in the shape of astrological symbols. Just a few flower beds, a stone bench, and the soft sound of leaves rustling overhead. This is where it ends. This is where the night gardeners fade. You sit on the bench and look around. It's not overgrown, not abandoned, just resting. You can feel it in the soil, the memory of movement, of hands that once dug and pruned and planted by lantern light. But now, the tools are gone, the gloves folded, the candles blown out. The age of Victorian night gardening didn't end all at once. It faded slowly, like the scent of lavender on an old handkerchief. The 20th century brought electricity, new medicines, new theories of sleep. The gas lamps were replaced by brighter bulbs. The mystery of the night was pulled into daylight by streetlights and alarm clocks and the growing culture of early to bed, early to rise. Insomnia didn't disappear, but it changed, became clinical, quantified, diagnosed, and the garden, it became a daytime hobby again, something to do on weekends. In the sun, with sunscreen and ergonomic tools and store-bought soil. You rise and walk slowly past a bed of night phlox, its petals just beginning to close. You think of the people who once bent over these same flowers, whispering secrets to the soil, hoping for sleep or solace, or simply something to do with their hands at 3 a.m. Historians still argue whether night gardening was ever truly widespread, or just an upper-class quirk. But the stories remain, in letters, in journals, in the bones of old estates where white gravel paths still curve under moonlight, in the faint scent of jasmine that clings to forgotten corners, and in the echoes. You hear them, don't you? A woman in a shawl humming to herself as she waters heliotrope, a man muttering poetry as he prunes back overgrown vines, two friends sitting cross-legged on the grass, sharing tea and truths, a child pointing at the moonflower as it opens, eyes wide with wonder. They're still here, not in the literal sense. Most of them are long gone, their gardens sold, paved, or swallowed by time. But the feeling remains, the quiet defiance, the delicate rebellion, the belief that the night doesn't have to be an enemy. That sleeplessness isn't failure, it's a second chance. A different rhythm. You pause beside a small sundial, its gnomon casting no shadow in this low light. Around its base, someone once carved a phrase, "I bloom in hours you do not see." You whisper it to yourself, half chant, half prayer. And you realize that's the truth of it, isn't it? The night gardeners didn't just fight insomnia. They reclaimed it, turned it into something beautiful, something useful, something alive. And though the practice faded, its legacy lingers, in moon gardens planted by modern hands, in herbal sleep sachets stitched with lavender and chamomile, in the quiet satisfaction of watering plants after dinner, long after the neighbors have gone to bed, in the growing awareness that rest isn't always about sleep. Sometimes it's about peace. You walk slowly back toward the heart of the garden, tracing your steps. The moon is sinking now, its silver light dulling to grey. You pass the trellis, the moonflower vines, the stone basin with its rippling reflection. Everything is softer now, sleepier. You're not alone, either. A cat, the same one from hours ago, slips silently between the rows of foxglove. A lantern flickers in the distance, someone else, still awake, tending one last pot. And the garden breathes, as it always has. Not loudly, just enough. You return to the bench one last time and sit with your hands in your lap, palms open. The garden around you begins to blur, not from darkness, but from light, the first hints of dawn bleeding into the horizon. And as it does, you feel it, the end of a ritual, the closing of a chapter, the last sigh of a flower folding into itself. The night gardeners may have faded, but they taught you something. That beauty doesn't always shout. That rest doesn't always mean stillness. That even in the darkest hours, something can grow. And maybe, just maybe, you'll carry that with you into your own midnight walks, your own restless hours, your own quiet garden beneath the stars. Because you are not alone. You never were.